Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I feel like we always throw that term of data around in the business world. Everybody's obsessed with data, especially in an AI world, but very few people are able to make data so usable as today's guest, and I think very few people in the data space can tell a story as well as today's guest can. So let me introduce you to today's guest and fellow entrepreneur. His name is Jeff Lumpkin. Jeff is the founder of Veritas Maps, which is a data visualization company dedicated to making real, trusted information accessible and understandable. Jeff spent 15 years at Microsoft in finance and on the Power BI customer advisory team, presenting to thousands of executives about using data effectively. He later served as VP of Analytics at a healthcare AI startup. He's a lifelong traveler and learner, and that is why Jeff is passionate about storytelling with data and combating misinformation. At Veritas Maps, his team makes complex data clear and actionable, helping people make better decisions with real-world facts. All of these, there's 5,000 different directions we could go in today's conversation, but each one of them gets me excited, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Jeff Lumpkin. All right, Jeff, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'm really happy to be here.
Heck yes. I teased just a little bit about you in the top of this episode, but I'm excited for you to take us beyond the bio and tell us, who's Jeff? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Well, it really started when I finished my MBA at Virginia, and I moved back to Seattle and started working at Microsoft. And I started working in finance. And I really love the numbers piece of it, and I love making sense of numbers, but I always felt like I was too far in the background. And I always wanted to be out more in front of customers, telling them, helping them be successful. And so when Microsoft introduced Power BI, I was a very early adopter. I spread it to my internal finance team. That work was noticed. And then I ended up moving pretty quickly to the Power BI team when it first started in 2015. And my role there, as you said, was on the customer advisory team. And this was a small group of about 8 guys. And we traveled around the world helping Microsoft's strategic customers to use Power BI effectively. The other thing that I started doing was presenting 3 to 5 times a week at Microsoft's Executive Briefing Center, and they were just called doing EBC sessions. And that's where I spent hundreds of hours speaking with executives and leaders of organizations, understanding the challenges that they had in using data, and helping them see what tools of Microsoft might help them in that regard. And that really ignited in me a passion for using data to tell stories. And one of the first data sets I really dug into was a data set from the Center for Disease Control on drug mortality. And it was a county level data set and one of the few available at that time. So I started running analytics on that and started mapping it. And to me, to be able to map a time series data set at the county level, it just felt to me that it opened up this huge world of analytics. And that was kind of my start in starting to use data in this way.
Yeah, it's such a cool overview, Jeff. You really take me back. So I majored in economics and finance in undergrad, and for sure, my favorite course was econometrics. And I'll never forget our econometrics professor was having us do regression analysis, and we did, I think it was like the number of sheep born in a specific place in Wales alongside ice cream sales in a certain part of Australia. And of course, our coefficient, our R-squared number was huge. I mean, the two looked like they were closely related. Of course, it's not a related data set, but it did open our eyes to the fact that data is data. We can manipulate it sometimes. We can use it to tell the story that we want to tell. And that's why I'm so fascinated, even in the name of your company, Veritas Maps, obviously honing right in on that Veritas, about the truth mattering. In the world of data, I think we often overlook what can be true and untrue about data. Why is that at the cornerstone of even the way that you named your business?
It's because when I look around the U.S. and around the world, I see a lot of challenges that are faced in terms of being able to come together and find commonality. And if we're all getting our news or information from broadly different sources and we don't know what we can trust, I think we lose the ability to communicate with each other. And so for me, being able to provide a trusted source of information with verifiable data sources that everyone can look at and share and have a high degree of trust that what they're looking at is accurate provides a platform for communication and shared understanding.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And me, especially, I love geography. For some reason, that was something that I always was fascinated by ever since I was a little kid. Probably part of it is I'm a first-generation American. My mom's family immigrated to the U.S., so maps always fascinate me. Data about places and countries and locales, that's always so fascinating. I, of course, am a big fan of what you're doing with Veritas Maps because it's so closely related to all of these things and all the considerations and complexities. But for listeners who aren't familiar with it, walk us through, what is Veritas Maps? What led you to forming it the way that you have?
So Veritas Maps, it's a startup company. There are 5 of us right now working, and our goal is to develop a number of data platforms to cover a wide variety of issues that are facing us, people in the world. So I focus very heavily on climate data, on weather data, on health-related metrics, but also things that you might not spring to mind. So for instance, I have this great data set from the Department of Agriculture on where crops are planted over the past 25 years. And it's fascinating to see the changing patterns in crop development and to see how climate change is moving crop growth northward towards Canada. It's a fascinating example of how data can really tell us stories that I think are a presentation of the truth.
Yeah, let's go there then, because weaving storytelling into this stuff is so much fun, and it was so eye-opening for me reading through, before you and I even got together here today, reading through your questionnaire about a story about your uncle giving you a slideshow after returning from the Peace Corps in India, and that really sparked this interest. Give us that backstory, Jeff. Obviously, I know about it, but I'd love for listeners to hear it from you.
Sure. Well, when I was a little kid, I had an uncle who, for the first 5 years of my life, I didn't really see because he was living overseas. And for much of that time, he had been living in a small village in India, and he was part of the first class of Peace Corps volunteers. And so it was really rough for him. And he was living in places that I think very few Western people had ever been to. So he came back and he had this slideshow that he gave when I was 5 years old that was, filled with tigers and elephants and people wearing really fantastic clothing and face paint. And it was so different from my world. I was captured by it. I wanted to go out and see it for myself. Even at 5 years old, I wanted to go out and do that. So I kind of built my academic life around creating the skill set that would allow me to go out into the world. And one of the first things I did when I graduated college is I worked for a year and saved money. And then I traveled around the world with a backpack for 9 months and went all through the South Pacific and Asia and Europe. And I came back to the U.S. with a determination that I would have a career that would allow me to engage the world, to look beyond my town or beyond my country and be able to go anywhere in the world and add value.
Yeah, and I think that part of what makes that story so special and so eye-opening for the very young version of you is the fact that it was a slideshow. It was visual. It was something that you could actually see. Obviously, we all know the power of storytelling, both in life, but especially in business and marketing and sales. But I also love the fact that we have that phrase in English of a picture tells 1,000 words. And so thinking about that and the data work that you've done, Jeff, we have had a lot of data analytics people on the show in the past, and obviously there's a lot of people in the world who work inside of the world of analytics. You focus on not only the analytical stuff, but the data visualization. Talk to us about why that's such an important thing, because when you talk about climate change, for example, you've given us that story about farming moving a little bit further north. It's one thing to hear you say that. I would argue it's a totally different thing to see it in action. Talk to us about the visualization piece.
I love maps because there is so much information contained in a map, and you can look at the 3,142 counties in the U.S. and instantly gain an appreciation for the data that is being displayed there. One of my favorite examples is if you pull up a map of where people drink alcohol the most in the U.S., and a map of where people smoke cigarettes the most in the US. Smoking takes place in the Southeast. And so I pulled that up, and it wasn't really a surprise to me. But when I visualized where people drink in the US, it was a completely different part of the country. It was the upper tier of states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas, where people drink the most. And it was such a surprise to me, but I was instantly able to tell so much from just looking at those two visualizations. And for me, even that, very simple demonstration shows the power of a map, in that you can pick up so much in just a matter of seconds.
Yeah, for sure. It's a cool story, especially because it makes me think about all the different data sources. I wouldn't even begin to know where to go for things like, smoking volume and drinking volume. Talk to us about data sources, because I also know that under the hood of Veritas Maps, that's one of the most important and valuable things that you guys do. You already alluded to it actually earlier in our conversation about we live in a world where we're all getting data and information from very different sources. How do you make sense of that in a data-heavy world?
I troll the internet for data sets, and I read a lot. So I have subscriptions to 4 different newspapers, 3 different magazines, and I just read those and pick up stories that are geographically focused, and then either track down the data source that the authors use to write those, or I'll reach out and contact authors directly and have them steer me towards their data sets. And so I collect data sets, and a lot of what I do is find the data set, figure out if I can use it, and if I can, then I put it into a standard format that allows it to render very, very rapidly. So in my county level analytic, I have more than 70 different data sources, more than 3,000 metrics that all render instantly. And a lot of the IP that I developed has been structuring the data in such a way that it can be accessed that rapidly.
Yeah, and it's cool to think about the various use cases, which I'm totally going to put you on the spot and invite you to share some of those use cases with listeners. But what I think about is what we can do with all of this data, especially when we can visualize it. I think about from a marketing perspective. There's probably some really tangible business insights that any of us could glean about our local markets, our domestic markets, our international markets, and those possibilities. Obviously, the political world is probably rife with use cases with your product. Jeff, walk us through, because a lot of people will be thinking about this, and it sounds like young you and I's dreams of playing around with maps and data all the time, but this is more than just a fun hobby. It has really meaningful and impactful impacts on real life markets. So walk us through some of those use cases.
Sure. When I was thinking about Veritas Maps in the beginning, I was trying to think about all the different ways this could be used. And that in part was why it was so exciting to me, is because I saw such broad application. So one is health. And what I'm very interested in is population health, and being able to identify parts of the United States where, with additional services or additional investment in health, we can really dramatically change hundreds of thousands of lives. So to identify those hotspots where heart disease is high or diabetes is high, allows us to, I think, render aid very, very rapidly. And one of the most exciting elements of my work has been contacting organizations like the Delta Regional Authority that are engaged in improving the well-being of people within their region, and working with them to see if my maps can't help make their job easier and more efficient.
I love that use case, especially because I think about the who. You're answering, it's one of the biggest questions that we all have in business is, who is this for? That's a real life use case and a real life case study that you've got there. What are the different who's? Because Jeff, obviously we all see the world through our individual lenses. I go straight to entrepreneurs and business owners because that's the life that I live. Talk to me about the various amount of who's that Veritas Maps can serve.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. We want to serve business as well, and to me, that's where bringing different scale of analytics to the table is really important. So besides county work, we also do work at the zip code level or down at the census tract level. And so for a nationwide company, you may wish to think about where can you locate retail branches and what demographics in which parts of the country meet the demographic requirements for your business. We can help identify the county level where that is, but then go super deep and identify, say, a city in Ohio and which neighborhoods have demographic requirements that your business can serve. And I think that Retail is a really important one. Insurance is an important one. Real estate, to me, is a really fun example of for real estate development and bringing housing markets more into balance, reducing housing shortages. Veritas Maps is a great tool for that.
Yeah. Ooh, I really appreciate those insights. Even just hearing you say that, I'm getting a million different ideas. For example, from a marketing perspective, many times I've looked at USPS, the postal service. They have a map where you can do the, mailbox deliveries, and you enter zip codes. And for me as an end user who's putting together a marketing campaign, I don't know much about those zip codes, and nor does USPS, because they are not a demographic company. They are experts at all of our mailboxes and our addresses and their routes. And so that's what they show you. This gives you so many deeper insights into it, which I can tell you as a consumer where my head goes when I'm putting together these types of campaigns and market research is I jump straight to AI. And Jeff, obviously AI is something that none of us can ignore in any of our businesses. How's AI playing into, whether from a positive attribute or maybe something that you're saying, hey, let's be cautious around this stuff? How's AI playing into the way that you do all this data and the visualizations behind it?
A number of ways. On a very basic level, I use AI to help me find data sets and to help me shape data sets. So one example was I found a list of injuries, workplace injuries, that only had the city and the state. And if I wanted to map things at the county level, there was no automated way to do that. But I used ChatGPT to complete this list of 90,000 injuries in an hour, whereas before trying to do it by hand would have been days of work. So task efficiency is really important. But the place where AI, I think, is really going to be helpful, and what we're working actively now to build out, is using AI to answer questions. So we have an initial version where we've paired a ChatGPT window next to a map, and you can ask a question based on what you're seeing on the map, and it spits out really great informative answers. So one example that I use is if we look at where Black populations or African American populations are highest in the U.S., it's down in two belts. One is along the Mississippi side of the Mississippi River. The second is this lateral belt that goes through southern Alabama. And so all I have to do is type in and say, why are there so many African Americans living in these two areas? And immediately got a full page of answers. It was really fascinating, and it goes back to 200 years ago, and big cotton plantations where the soil was really conducive towards producing cotton and required huge amounts of labor. 200 years later, those populations are still intact and living in that same place.
Yeah, it's very cool insights, especially when you consider the impacts on government and policy decisions, when you consider the impacts on the educational realm within the academic world. How many of these questions do we think about? And that sparks additional research that goes into all of these things. It's cool to hear that, especially in your space, AI and the large language model, that conversational component, has a lot of powers to provide those real life insights. Jeff, I will admit, while we're together here on the air publicly, that part of what I admire about Veritas Maps is not just the data side of your business. It seems to me like you really put a strong emphasis on the UI as well. Is that making data accessible? Because of course that's part of your mission. That's equally important. Is you want anybody to be able to, not just a data expert such as yourself, you want anyone to be able to log in and start playing around and finding answers to those real life questions. Talk to us about the UI considerations, because I would imagine that that's an entire area of its own focus when it comes to building out Veritas Maps.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's a huge piece. So contrast the experience of downloading a CSV file that may have, 800,000 rows and 400 columns, and trying to make sense of that in a tool like Excel, versus having a map where you click on a metric such as median household income in 2024 and have that instantly render. And then 1 second later, being able to say poverty rates in 2010 and have that instantly render. And making the UI so simple and so fast accelerates the process of learning. And people can gain learning and understanding on the Veritas platform in, I think, a way that's unparalleled elsewhere.
Yeah, I love that. It's very cool. And I'm sure, obviously, at the end of today's episode, we're going to be dropping links. So if people want to go on your website, you display so many of those use cases. You display so many of the indicators that you have access to of what people can explore inside of the platform. So I'm very excited to tease those links at the end of today's episode. But before we get there, Jeff, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about you as the founder, because obviously here on an entrepreneurial podcast, we're so fascinated not just by what people do, but how they do it. What is your decision-making process look like behind the scenes? Because I would imagine that you have a lot of growth plans. There's a lot of things that you want to do long into the future with Veritas Maps, but also you do have limited resources. We all have limited resources, so you have to prioritize. What's that filter look like at the executive level, whether between yourself and your team? How do you make decisions on what to focus on and what to prioritize?
There are several considerations, one of which is the market. So do I perceive a market for what I'm going to produce? And what would that sales process look like? So we want to be efficient in terms of driving sales. The second one, and one that over the years I found myself moving towards more firmly, is the desire to affect positive change in the world. And Microsoft, particularly when Satya became CEO, I think Microsoft moved in that direction. And to me, that was really important. So when I left Microsoft and I joined the AI medical startup, it was in large part because I thought we could really help improve health outcomes for millions of people. And in founding Veritas Maps, I had the same desire to use data to improve health, improve equity, improve climate. And so when I'm building something, I want to build it in such a way that it can be used to drive positive change. And that plays a big role in my decisions.
Yeah, I love that. I would imagine it actually makes your decision-making process easier as well. Having that North Star and always having that guiding principle. When you're at those crossroads, you can just simply lean on what's going to make the world a better place, what's going to move all of these missions and the exact reason why we're doing this forward. So it's really cool to hear that. What does your executive time look like when you sit down by yourself or with your internal team and you think about that future? What are the questions that you're asking? Is it a landscape of what's available? Is it a landscape of what's to come? Is it question marks about technology because that is progressing faster than ever before? What are those internal questions looking at the long-term future that you're asking yourself?
I am thinking a lot about technology for sure. One fun example there is I'm serving as an advisor for a master's degree program in data analytics. And the team that I'm working with has a final project, and that is to take a data set, clean it up, analyze it, and then produce a series of recommendations based on that data. And one of the students raised a really fascinating question to me, which was, why should we go through all this traditional data preparation, pipeline building, et cetera, when we can get AI to do it in a 20th of the time? And it was kind of, when he first said that, I was a little bit shocked at how young kids in master's degree programs are able to see the use of AI in such a way that we hadn't imagined 6 months ago. And so understanding how I can apply that in my own business, to me, is really important. The second thing is figuring out where to focus my time in terms of moving the business forward. So I've built a really strong platform of analytics. To me, the next step is figuring out how to transfer that into something that really hits the market strongly. And so that's what my team and I are looking at now, is figuring out ways to penetrate and sell seats.
Yeah, I love that. Important considerations in all of our businesses, which makes me want to talk to Jeff, the entrepreneur, because obviously you had a very successful career leading up to the founding of Veritas Maps, but now you have to ask these big questions. You have to think about market penetration. You have to think about how you're going to broaden that mission. And so with all of that in mind, Jeff, how different has it been as an entrepreneur now, managing all of the things, worrying about the way that everything functions, front office, back office, development, customer satisfaction, customer growth? What has that transition been like?
It has been scary, I got to say. And there are a lot of things that I wake up in the middle of the night, I think, I didn't do this, I forgot to do this. But at the same time, it is so invigorating to be able to play in so many different spaces, to think both very tactically, but also very strategically. And I'm relishing my ability to handle the discomfort in a way that wasn't the case 2 years ago. And I think finding that flexibility and maybe the bravery to live with that discomfort and find it to be fun and exhilarating, to me, it has been a big shift.
Yeah, I love that. Use the word invigorating. That's something that I always tell people if they're standing on the sidelines wanting to start their business. I always tell them it's going to be fun, it's going to be challenging, but the juice is always going to be worth the squeeze. And Jeff, it's fun because you called out strategy and tactics. And I think that's such an important distinction that most people lose in the sight of figuring all the things out and in sight of long to-do lists that we all face. I'd love to go a little bit deeper there into your executive mind, because I think that is such a mature entrepreneurial mindset that really a lot of people could learn a lot from. What is that difference when you sit down to think about strategy versus tactics? Where does your head go?
I try to be very deliberate about that, and I'd like to call out my team as really playing an awesome key role in doing that. So my business partner is a super experienced strategic level executive who worked for decades in marketing. And I love to speak with him and get his opinion on strategy and the direction of the company, because he brings so much experience into that. And at times when I'm feeling agitated or nervous, he's there to calm me down and to keep me on the path. And finding that balance between working individually and being part of the team, to me, is a super important part of being a leader. It is not forgetting that, particularly when we're this small, that I have to dig in and be just as deep as anyone on my team.
Yeah, for sure. Well, then I'm going to ask you a big question, Jeff. I'm totally going to put you on the spot here on the air. What's the future of Veritas Maps? Because knowing that you're balancing all of these things, and I love the fact that you've been so intentional as well about the team that you've built around you. What's the future of Veritas Maps? When you look into that, 5-10 year and beyond future, where does your head go? What is it that you picture, and what gets you most excited?
I want to create a platform where people can come and not only see what I've produced, but produce something on their own, where we have put together hundreds of thousands of data sets and built them in such a way that people can combine them and build up what they need and create their own analytical platform based on what they need or what they're interested in. And that, of course, we're a long way from that, but I think making access to data easily available for millions of people would be a tremendous achievement.
Ooh, I love that. Again, coming back to that mission, Jeff, I'm not going to lie. I'm excited to also chat with you off air, because my mind goes in 5 million directions about all the possibilities for what it is that you're building and the path that you're on. And it's exciting. And I know that the entire Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur global audience is going to be very excited to see it. But before we let you go, I always ask this super broad question at the end of every episode. And that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their growth journeys, and also knowing that you are one of us, you are a fellow entrepreneur yourself in the midst of growing something incredible and something impactful in the world. What's that one piece of advice that you want to leave them with?
I might even have a couple, but one is be flexibly deliberate, and that is have an end goal in mind, but if you need to change, you need to change, and don't be afraid to adapt to new circumstances. The second is live within your means and make changes that you can afford if you fail completely. And be prepared to take a lot of small risks and see some succeed and some fail, but avoid taking such big risks that you kill your company before it has a chance to really grow.
Boom. Jeff, I'll tell you what, in over 1,200 episodes, that second piece of advice in particular, I think you're the very first guest to ever offer that advice. And as someone who has started multiple companies myself, both as a teenager and especially in adulthood, that is very important advice that not everybody's going to give us, but it is the absolute truth. And I'm so grateful for you giving that advice to our entrepreneurial audience here today. I'm also very excited for people to see Veritas Maps in action. Hearing us talk about it is one thing, but seeing it in action is an entirely different thing. So for listeners who want to get their hands on it and all the cool things that you and your team are up to, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
It's veritasmaps.com. is I was so excited to get that very simple URL. And then I also have my team putting out a lot, particularly on Instagram and Facebook. We have a lot of presence.
Yes, I love it. Jeff, again, huge kudos to you. I'm also very impressed that you got that URL. Super easy for listeners to remember, veritasmaps.com. But if you're on the go, you're driving, you're at the gym, you're in the shower, have no fear. We're putting that link down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Otherwise, Jeff, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide in over 150 countries, all of which appear on your maps, thank you so much for joining us here on the show.
It was great to be here, Brian. We really appreciate the chance to talk with you.